In 2017, I heard news of people dressing up as clowns and running around with knives at night. I typically brushed those things off because I got my own problems. I, at the time 20-year-old female, was often up all hours of the night dealing with my screaming newborn. It was January or February, so we still had some snow, and I wasn't able to get out of the house often. Taking out the trash, which is located right out of the back door, was usually the most I got of fresh air. One morning, I took out the trash and happened to glance over at the right and noticed footprints directly under the window to my baby's room. I walked over to inspect, and not only were there footprints, but there were also hand indentations on the window screen. Weird, but baby slept in my room, so not very concerned at the moment, but boyfriend was losing his marbles. Fast forward a couple days, and I was up around 3 a.m. and heard not exactly what I would call screaming, but more like a screeching howl. We have lots of stray cats, so I kinda thought that's what it was. I ignored it. Once the sun was up, I looked out the window and noticed a few sets of footprints that really didn't make any sense, because it kinda looked like someone had just been passing in between the houses. But again, I blow it off because we had a drug house across the street, and we have had plenty people cross through our yard before to get to that house. Maybe 4 nights later, again, at 3 a.m., I'm breastfeeding, and I hear a dragging noise against the house. From where I was sitting on my couch, I could see the back door. The back door has a window with blinds on it and doesn't seal well due to wood rot on the frame. I paused the TV and listened just to hear it again, now directly at the back door. Looking over, I can clearly see a looming figure just standing in the window, holding one of those big kitchen knives, and granted, the blinds were shut, so I'm seeing the creepy shadow version of this. He runs the knife across the window pane before softly knocking. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what to do with the newborn latched on, because my phone is in the bedroom, and something in me doesn't want whoever this is out of my vision. So I stand up and readjust because I really didn't want a screaming baby right then, walking into my kitchen, and flick on the light, and then said, just loud enough for him to hear me, "Hey man, I already called the police, and I'm sure you don't want to deal with them, so why don't you go home?" I don't know why I talked to him so calm and normal, but I don't think he was expecting anyone to say anything, because he froze the moment I began talking. He talked it over with himself for a minute and darted down toward the alleyway. Never had anything like that happen again, but boyfriend sure was mad I didn't wake him up to handle the situation, or at least actually call the police. Not sure if this counts as a creepy encounter, but I sure was creeped out once my sleep-deprived self realized what had happened. Anyone remember back in 2016, there was this big thing about killer clowns? Well, I didn't really believe in any of it at first. I thought it was just a joke, until it happened to me. I was in the 10th grade when the whole clown thing happened. I didn't really believe it. I thought it was just a big joke. Just a bunch of losers that had nothing better to do but to scare people on Halloween. One night I was walking home from my boyfriend's house. It was a far walk, but I liked getting out as much as I could, and was looking forward for a long walk home. When I finally got to the east end of town near the East Court Mall, halfway home, I saw a group of people standing in the parking lot in the dark. They started yelling at me. Now, I was 16 and a female at the time, so I was used to people, mostly guys, yelling at me or just whistling at me. At first I thought it was a joke, just another group of guys yelling at me from across the street, because they have nothing better to do. I just shook it off when I noticed 2 of them were walking towards me. I couldn't make out their faces at first, until they got a bit closer, and were walking behind me. I kept hearing them yelling at me, but the second time they did it, they started laughing like psychopaths, and laughing like clowns. I looked back to see what they were both wearing, which were clown masks, and I could see behind them that there were 3 more clowns. I didn't want to panic or show them I was scared, so I just walked a bit faster until I got to the end of my street. I didn't want them to see where I lived, so I made a wrong turn and walked up to a house pretending to go inside. I hid behind a bush to see them walk right by me, until I heard one of them yell out of a horrifying clown laugh, and a few others followed them. "I'll find you, pretty lady. Come on, come out and play. We know where your street is, and we will find you." They finally left, and I went home, but a few hours later, I was getting a snack before bed, and I happened to look out of my kitchen window to see a group of clowns walking past my house. I have heard and read a lot of horror stories on the internet, and I've always been quick to dismiss them as fake or fabricated. However, after the experience I had, which I am currently putting into writing, I can attest that when you hear these stories and you feel like they can never happen to you, and that the experiences are somewhat displaced from reality, they really do happen, and they do have lasting impacts on people's lives. My experience was easily the most horrifying and disturbing experience of my life. All the names in the story have been changed to keep the identities and locations confidential. The night in question started like any other typical summer night. My hometown holds a pretty big fair to cap the end of the summertime festivities, and this year was no different. I attended the fair with 2 best friends, Kevin and Jeff. Once arriving at the fairgrounds, we decided to meet up with my girlfriend Jamie and her 2 friends, Amanda and Jill. We were having a blast, eating food, checking out the local items for sale at the tents, listening to music, and walking around just taking in the environment. For those of you that attend your local fairs, you know that something about them brings out some unique people. And shortly after arriving, we bumped into a particular patron who was very unique. It was a middle-aged man, dressed like a clown. His dirty and rugged clothes almost made him look homeless, but I figured it was just part of the clown getup. This peculiar-looking man had a rubber red nose and a clown wig that came with shoes the size of a small boat. As we were walking, he came from behind us, grabbed my friend Kevin, and asked for some spare change. It was harmless, honestly, but just startled our group as we didn't see him approaching. I think we gave him $5 or $10 and wished him a good evening and continued walking in the direction we were going. After creating a nice distance away from the clown, we decided to take a break from walking, grab a drink as it was pretty hot out. This is when I noticed a man in the distance. He's wearing a red mask, black hooded sweatshirt, jeans, and work boots, and was carrying what appeared to be an axe or a hatchet. It is important to note that at this point, we were on the midway of the fair, which contained tons of rides and games as far as you could see. So even though this man gave me a pause, I was not real concerned because there were fun houses and haunted house exhibits all over this section of the fair. A few minutes later, we decided to do some rides so each one of us could break off into pairs. That's when I noticed the masked man again. We were on one of those old-fashioned wooden roller coasters when I noticed the man was standing behind the attraction. As soon as the ride ended, I kind of made a dash toward the exit of the ride. Kevin and Jeff were kind of annoyed and finally yelled for me to stop. Several yards away from the roller coaster, I told the group about the masked man and how I wanted to tell some kind of fair security just to see if this man was in fact part of the fair or a crazy person walking around with a weapon. The group laughed and told me to calm down. They pointed to one of the haunted houses, and there was a zombie standing outside scaring people in line. A few more exhibits down was a fun house where a killer clown was messing with guests. They told me to relax and that the Axeman was just to be part of the fair. I agreed and went back to trying to have a good time with everyone. Toward the end of the night, we were getting ready to leave and head back to Jamie's house for some night swimming when Jeff wanted to get some ice cream. We agreed to stop on the way out. While Kevin, Jeff, Amanda, and Jill waited in line, Me and Jamie sat off to the side and just people watched, until Jamie's face turned ghost white. Once I noticed her expression change, I turned and noticed the Axeman standing in the distance. I decided no more games, and I ran after the man full speed ahead. I chased him through one of the animal tents, but due to the large amount of people, I lost him. I figured since he ran away, that he must have been someone who worked for the fair that was messing with us, right? A few hours later, we were at Jamie's sitting around the fire. It was just the six of us enjoying some conversation and laughs. Our bliss suddenly turned to panic when we heard shuffling through the forest that sits behind Jamie's house. We stopped talking and stared into the thick, dark trees. All we could hear was the crackling of fire and the stillness of the night as we stared into the black void. Then, out of the darkness was the Axeman, and his red mask appeared. He ran full speed out of the trees with the same axe in hand. The expressionless red mask and the way his head was tilted is an image I'll never be able to get out of my head. This isn't happening. This can't be real, is all I could think of as the six of us sprinted away from the fire. Jamie's house was too far away, so we ran to the pool house, which is a small little room filled with all the pool toys and chlorine, etc. for the pool. And just like every horror movie cliche out there, Jamie truly lived in the middle of nowhere. Any cell phone was back inside with my clothes. I arrived at the pool house first and opened the door. I just about pushed everyone in and made my way in last, and as I tried to shut the door, the man threw down his axe and sliced the top of my arm. Grimacing in pain, listening to screaming behind me, I was able to grab the door and shut it and lock it. The man beat on the door either with his hand or the handle of the axe. We screamed and cried, and by some stroke of luck, Jamie had a landline phone in the small pool house and dialed 911. The Axeman must have heard the conversation, because he immediately stopped trying to break down the door. I peered out the window and noticed the figure facing the door but not moving. His black eyes staring out of the red mask, holding the axe with both hands. He then lifted the axe and threw it at the door. After just a couple of seconds, he removed his mask, and this is when we realized he was not a he at all, but a woman. She had makeup running down her face as if she were crying all night. She fell to her knees and began to scream and cry. The emotions we all felt at this moment were almost indescribable. That is when I noticed Jeff. Looked like he was going to be sick. The woman with the axe was his ex-girlfriend from college that none of us had ever met. He was in shock and clearly at a complete loss of words. No sooner after this revelation did the cops show up and promptly arrest her. We all gave our statements and went our separate ways for the evening. I stayed with Jamie to make sure she was going to be okay. I know writing this story, it sounds ludicrous, and might be a stretch for some of you to believe, but I know the fear I felt that night, and the raw emotions that will impact my life forever. Everyone be careful out there, and always be aware of your surroundings. This story takes place around mid-2016, right in the heat of the whole clown trend. I don't know if trend is the right word there. A lot of people have stories from this time, and mine isn't as scary as others, but I felt like sharing nonetheless. This was around fall break of 2016. My cousin and I were both in middle school, me in the 8th grade and him in the 7th, and I was staying over at his house one night during fall break. There were quite a few people in the house that night. Me, my cousin, his 10-year-old brother, his 3-year-old sister, 3-month-old baby brother, his dad, and his stepmom. Let me try to explain the layout of the house and yard. They lived in a rather large double-wide trailer that they bought and had out on a flattened part of a hill. Their driveway is a rather steep gravel slope that connected to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house, up the hill, was nothing but woods. The nearest house was just slightly down the hill to the left, closer to the road. That was our grandparents' house. With the layout set up, let me continue the story. As I said, my cousin and I were the only ones still awake. We were watching TV, probably some shitty sitcom on Nickelodeon at night or something. We kept hearing noises in the woods behind the house. We could see into the woods from the window in the living room where we were sitting, but we didn't pay much attention to it since it was kind of windy. Plus, my uncle had lots of motion lights outside the house. In the back facing the woods, the side door, close to the driveway on the opposite side of the house, and on the slightly elevated porch that overlooked the front yard and the road. So we weren't too worried about anyone or anything actually being outside, since anything out there would have triggered the lights. We had heard lots of stories and watched lots of YouTube videos about the whole killer clown thing, and to be honest, I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just prank videos. Something made up just to get clickbait views. Plus, we live in a small town in northeast Tennessee, where everyone and their dog owns some sort of firearm. That included my uncle, a retired veteran. So we were never afraid of anyone dressing up as a clown trying to jump out for a quick scare and a funny video reaction. So we were just sitting on the couch watching the TV show, the only light being the TV and the dim light above the kitchen sink that was only a few feet behind the couch. Suddenly, the back motion detector light came on. We did notice it, but didn't think anything of it. The lights were set on 10-minute timers. If it detected one movement, it would stay on and would turn off after 10 minutes if no other movement was detected. After 10 minutes, they went back off, so we figured it was just an animal, which wasn't uncommon. After about 20 minutes, I went to the bathroom down the hall. I did my business and washed my hands. When I came back out, the motion light on the side of the house by the side door that entered into the laundry room came on and shone through the thin blinds that were on the door. I swore I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside. Then the doorknob started to rattle, as if someone was trying to open it. I ran into the living room and got back in my spot on the couch. Luckily the blinds were shut, so whatever it was didn't see me. I knew my cousin heard the same thing I did, because he was already up and halfway into his dad's room to wake him up. At that point I saw the light from the front porch come on, so I got up to look out the window that looked out to the porch. By this point my uncle had his pistol and flashlight, and was out on the front porch looking for who or whatever it was. My cousin and I were behind him on the porch watching. He looked around with the flashlight when we saw it. There at the bottom of the hill, in the ditch by the road, was a clown. It was a crappy costume, one from probably Walmart or Spirit Halloween. It just looked at us and waved. My uncle fired a warning shot and the clown ran across the road and into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep anymore that night. My uncle stayed out on the porch for a few more hours to make sure no one came back. I remember him telling us not long after the shot was fired, he heard what sounded like an ATV starting up and driving away. Troublesome kids were always, and still are, an issue in that area. There were houses somewhat close to each other, but far enough that you couldn't see them. The only house we could see was our grandparents' house. I don't doubt it was just a high school kid playing a prank just to scare whoever it was in the house. Years later, after reading some more experiences with these clowns, of people's lives actually being threatened, it still scares me to think of what he would have tried to do if he was able to get in the house.